num, num num, birdie num num.
When I have understanding of computers, I shall be the supreme being. God isn't interested in technology. He knows nothing of the potential of the microchip or the silicon revolution. Look how he spends his time. 43 species of parrots. Nipples for men.
Don't do that, Jesus Christ! You're gonna get me killed!
Out of here!
Oh, Billy.
And we are live. Welcome everybody to AV Live. Yes, I am continually tweaking the intro because I'm just insane and it just makes sense. So I can deal with the whole nipples for men issue. But it is interesting that I used Terry Gilliam's movie Time Bandits, and in that movie, part of the plot is this war between the Satan figure and God wanting to keep nature and organic evolution, and the Satan figure wanting to start over with technology and have technology being the ruling force in creation. So Terry Gilliam might have been a little prescient for what we're dealing with, and certainly with the theme that we're dealing tonight, and that is Lucifer's technologies. And for that, it's always great to have my friend Chris Knowles. Chris, thanks for being here.
Well, thanks for having me.
Awesome. And yes, the chat room is it's filling up already over 100 people, and we usually don't hit peak until about half hour into the interview. And with us too, we've got the Moondog Vance. Vance, how you doing?
I'm pretty good. Just sitting here surrounded by technology.
Yeah, isn't it a wonderful thing?
The time to surrender.
Yeah, exactly.
Or fight.
Awesome. Well, as always, if you have questions for Mr. Knowles, please type them in all caps. Question marks, super chats get put at the top, and we will try to get it to you as soon as possible. Other than that, we'll get started. I wanted to mention too, there are ways. A lot of you are tipping via Red Circle and Rockfin, and I want to thank you very much. But unfortunately, I can't thank you personally through a message. But for those of you who tip and support, I really appreciate what you're doing, and I really appreciate your company and you joining us tonight, which is on a very, very important topic. I wanted to start by showing a screenshot, Chris, of something you said today, and you've mentioned it, but I think it's extremely important. And I'm going to put it up right now. And that's you, Chris. The supernatural is real. The spirit realm is real. The world is run by sorcery, not science. It's a hard pill for most people to swallow. Believe me, I get it. It goes against everything we're told, even by our so-called religious authorities. But it's the real red pill. So awesome quote, Chris. Killing it on Twitter, and it certainly relates to everything we're talking about tonight, doesn't it?
Yeah, it certainly does, unfortunately.
I'd rather be talking about Rush or arguing about the Matrix or talking about Jack Kirby, but this stuff needs to get out because your Lucifer technologies, like all the research he does, it's not self-correcting, but it's more like self-feeding. The future kind of feeds your past research, and it just gets on more steroids, or what do we say? It just never stops.
Never ends. It never ends. It never ends. No, it doesn't. And you know what? I'd be more than happy to have everything I talked about 5 years ago not have come true, but this is where we are today. And, these patterns establish themselves and they run a certain course, and you have to just follow them to their conclusion. I mean, we have no choice, history is cyclical. These kind of patterns of empire are cyclical. And I think, you could even argue that these like spiritual patterns are cyclical. The interesting thing is that, we are in this situation where the noose is tightening, the technocratic noose around our throat is getting tighter and tighter. COVID passes and social scores, now they're saying that they're going to tie your credit score to your browsing history. One thing after the other. The intrusion is getting to be overwhelming, and it's sort of tied together with this whole, what I call the satanic gospel of woke, which is kind of like, it's basically everything bad about Calvinism without grace and forgiveness. It's basically, it's like Torquemada meets Calvin without the Christian bits of at least some nominal nod towards forgiveness and so on. So we're really, we're staring down the barrel of it right now, and it's coming straight towards us. It's going to get crazy worse before it gets better. But at the same time, what's happening, since this genie has been let out of the bottle, since these spirits have been summoned and invoked, there's a counteraction, there's a reaction to that. And I think, what I tune into, and people probably just think I'm crazy, but, it's just that the spiritual world is very alive, and it's very much merging with our own. If you really get out there and you open your antenna and you just sort of let go of your ego and your preconceptions and stuff, and just let the information in, I think you'll find that, it isn't all bad news, that it's just this cycle is coming to a close, and these forces and these powers, which are just basically the forces of life and death, really, that's what it really boils down to. And if you read your New Testament carefully, particularly like your Revelation, it's like, I have the keys of hell and death. It's death and hell are the same thing. That's what the resistance is. So it's always like, are you moving in a direction towards life? Or are you moving in a direction towards death? Those are your two choices. And I think these forces sort of come to these periodic conflicts, because the forces of life and death are codependent. It's just sort of like this dance. It's almost like the whole Tao cliche. Mm-hmm. But I think that things become imbalanced, things becomes out of balance, and I think that this whole intrusion into this realm from like this ultra-terrestrial realm with through technology, I think is thrown this out of balance, and I think this is like the catalyst for this round of the apocalypse game. That makes sense.
Yeah. Oh, look who paid a little money to ask you a question. I'm sure you're shocked. Do you see that on the screens? Which dark timeline has Chris X joined us from?
I don't even know how to answer that. Same timeline we're all in, unfortunately. It's a pretty dark timeline at the moment.
Yes, it is indeed. And in fact, from Lucifer's Technologies, I wanted to put this up. Here's a quote from you, and then we can start really digging deep. But it's like you could have said that today, but you said that in 2016. How do we go from a world where technology remained essentially static for thousands of years to a world in which we become slaves to our own machines? And that's certainly something we want to deal with tonight. But before we ask that question, let's talk about the inspiration. I know you wrote it early in 2016, and that was I guess the apocalypse was starting. Remember when all these great bards and shamans, I think it was David Bowie, Maurice White, Prince, they were just dropping like flies. Like the light was starting to leave the universe. The starmen were going back to their source because it had enough. And it was weird. And then, as you say, the Lucifer Technology just came to you, right? It was one of those manic, I'm going to write this shit down.
Yeah, I have a lot wrong with my brains, and I tend to go into these sort of manic phases where I get, I lock onto an idea and the OCD takes over, and I can't sleep for days, and I'm reading like stacks of books and just burning through reams of information. I did the same thing with the Secret Star Trek series, which is really very deeply connected to this. It's all part of the same continuum. I'm learning that, the more I study all these things that I sort of like, this thing over here and this thing over here and this thing over here, I realize that they're all part of the same process. So gosh, I don't even. Oh, I know what it was. It was that stupid Lucifer show. That show was on Fox, right?
Oh
And
God.
then it moved to
Yeah.
Netflix. That awful abomination of a show. And it was actually based on a comic book I used to read, published by Vertigo, written by Mike Carey.
Good
And
storyline, and that's
yeah,
based on Neil Gaiman's little storyline in the Sandman.
yeah, the whole thing with the Endless and Sandman.
Yeah.
So that show came out, and it just, I don't know, it just, lit a fire. But then I started looking, like, I think, I did something on that, and then I looked at, I had another fire burning in the back of my brain, because I started to realize that not Lucifer, Paradise Lost by John Milton, and I came to strongly believe that the Lucifer figure in that was based on Giordano Bruno.
Mhm.
And I think that, I think Milton's father had some connections with him, because Bruno was actually in London at the time and was, sort of spreading his ideas around. And when I was reading Paradise Lost, it just seemed to me like, this is Bruno. He's making a statement on Bruno, because it's the time of the English Civil War, and, the Cavaliers and the Roundheads and the Catholics and the Protestants. It was a very dark and ugly time. And I think that that's really what he was referring to. So that got me sort of started on the whole Faust thing, right? And I was thinking about, Christopher Marlowe, and then on the other end of the ledger there was Shakespeare. So I started thinking about that, and I started thinking about Faust, and I think that just sort of led me to this whole notion that, we are living in a Faustian reality. We've made a Faustian bargain with our technology. And the interesting thing too is that, before, after I had done the Lucifer Risings thing, that was when the Gotthard Tunnel crazy, insane ritual took place in Switzerland. And that, that was not too long after I had done the Lucifer's Rising thing. And that really started this whole avalanche of public ritual, that these public rituals, particularly, among themes like, Lucifer, fall, the Watchers, the Nephilim, all these kind of things in the Super Bowls and the awards ceremonies. I mean, this stuff started to become really explicit not long after I had written Lucifer's Technology. And that sort of ultimately led me to the realization that, these people are doing these things, going to all this expense and time, putting these very elaborate rituals on because they work, that they work in that we've discussed this before. But, these rituals work for them. They achieve what they're after. And, it's because somebody's on the other end of the line, somebody's picking up the phone when they're being called by these very elaborate and very expensive and ostentatious rituals. And we just saw this recently with Astroworld, the Astroworld thing with Travis Scott there, and that reminded me very much of the situation, the Highway 91 Harvest Festival in Las Vegas at the beginning of October. And then all the things that happened after that, because not long after that, that's when Tom DeLonge came out with this whole UFO thing that just continues to run on, even though, does anybody have any interest in that? For some reason, they just keep this UFO train running, regardless of when anybody cares. I don't care. You don't care. I used to be really into ufology, and that really sort of stopped my interest dead in its tracks.
Yeah.
Like it was the ufology killer. Maybe that was the intention. I don't know. But now, I don't know if you heard, but in the Senate, they've passed a resolution to start like an X-Files office.
Oh man,
a new X-Files office.
It's like when a teenager's parent joins Facebook.
Oh my God, yeah. It's awful. It's so stupid. But the thing that really occurred to me, so we've got this, increasingly invasive and Orwellian technology, right? But then we have this just bizarre and unending interest in this UFO topic that people are just so sick of now. And then also what I call MK Ultra 3.0, which is like hallucinogenic research, quote unquote, And it's like, it all sort of ties together. It also ties together what I was talking about, the year before in this Lucifer's Rising thing, that the invention, quote unquote, of the microchip was preceded by some very big, major public rituals, if you want to call them that. I mean, it starts with the Trinity tests in New Mexico, and then we have Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and then we have Project Diana, which was bouncing radar signals off the moon, and that happened while those two bozos out in California were doing the Babylon working thing.
Parsons.
Yeah.
Yeah. You have the Nag Hammadi Library 45.
Nag Hammadi Dead Sea Scrolls. I mean, all this stuff was coming to the surface. But then, when you get up to 47, you've got Maury Island and Kenneth Arnold in the what is it, the Cascade Mountains up there. So, the prime was being pumped, or the pump was being primed for what we ended up seeing in this, what I call the Roswell working. And also, another thing I want to add in before that was the Shelter Island conference. And there was this through line of symbolism, particularly with the ram. And the ram, is Amun or Jupiter Ammon, the horned and hidden gods, Cernunnos, I mean, whatever you want to call it, Pan. But, this symbolism is just recurring throughout all these different rituals, and all this stuff. I mean, it's all calling on the gods, And, even during the war, we had the Nike program, and there was like Nike Hercules and Nike Zeus and Nike this and Nike that. So, and that was all connected to AT&T. So it all ends up with the announcement of the invention of the germanium transistor in December, at the very end of 1947. And the thing is, though, it's like when you look into this, it's very sudden. It's very sudden. And, there's been some talk that there were like, precursors to it and patents made on the transistor. And I looked into them, and it's just like, this is just garbage. I mean, if the MJ, the MJ files, what was that called? You know what I'm talking about, those UFO files that they had found with the Eisenhower briefing document and all this kind of stuff. Majestic 12.
Majestic 12, yeah.
So, I mean, if those things could have been planted in the Library of Congress or whatever, why couldn't these bogus patents? Because there was nothing published, and there were no actual physical models made. And I really started looking into this, and there's a book that I had read that really documented this whole process of the invention of the microchip, and people were like using terms like black magic, sorcery. I mean, people were like using these terms because at Bell Labs in Murray Hill, which isn't too far from me, and actually my wife used to work there for a few years. They just didn't have the facilities that you really need to create these these rectifiers and so on. They didn't, because you have to mess with elements and what's called doping, and you sort of insert one element into another element. I mean, it's very, very elaborate, and it's very complex, and you really need like a Lawrence Livermore or a Sandia. I mean, something like a big government lab with like really major equipment, and they didn't have it. They just didn't have it at Bell Labs. So, it's all very strange, and it's all very sudden. I mean, and even before the transistor came out, I mean, people like, I think it was Wolfgang Pauli, who was a very heavy duty physicist, said, this is never going to happen. I mean, just forget about this whole semiconductor thing. It's just not going to happen. And, lo and behold, it does. And it does, following this cycle of grand ritualism. And that really sort of struck me. And then when I just started looking into the whole background and the whole Roswell thing, it really became obvious to me that Roswell, was not a weather balloon, and it was not a UFO. It was like a very, very elaborate ritual that tied in to a very specific kind of mythology that has to do with like the great gods of Samothrace and Cadmus and all these kind of things. This very specific recurring symbolism. And I'm just like, that can't be accidental. That just can't be like, oh, that's just a coincidence, that these people are doing all these things and using all this symbolism. And then lo and behold, this invention that changes all of humanity, that changes the course of history, is the outcome of it. You know, and
yeah, let me show you this visual while you're talking. There's it. And that is so stunning. This is, like you said, this is humanity, and it's putting away, and then suddenly, what, 1947, everything just shoots up. Technology goes haywire, right?
yeah, well, you know, there's a bunch of them. But if you really think about it, you know, if you really sit down and think about it, you know, the Greeks and the Romans, they were messing around with like primitive steam engines and even primitive robotics and things like that, right?
Right.
But they didn't really have any practical use for them. So if you really go back, you know, I always use the example of like 1700 BC to 1700 AD, right? I mean, you have like sailing ships, you know, wooden sailing ships with, you know, with leather sails. You have horse and carriage. You know what I'm saying? I mean, you have a very static development of technology, and the technology is really not all that much different in that span of 3,400 years. And that's amazing when you look at, like, you get to the 20th century, and in 1920, the state of the art of airplanes were wood and duck canvas propeller planes. And then by the early 1960s, you have the SR-71, which we still can't figure out. We still can't match it. You know, they've been unable to, you know, to figure out how to duplicate that plane, because it was like the fastest human conveyance ever created or ever invented. And, you know, that's a space of 40 years. So you've got like 40 centuries where nothing is changing, right? And then you've got overnight, everything sort of comes out of the toy box, and it's all after Roswell. So, you know, and, you know, there was this book written by this guy named Philip Corso, and this was a big book back in the 90s, and he was talking about how, like, you know, the old crashed UFO thing and the retrieval, and this was a very popular thing back in the 90s. But
The day after Roswell, yeah.
yeah, exactly. But, you know, the more you look at his arguments, it's just like, it doesn't really hold water, you know? If you had technology that it was even like a couple of 100 years ahead of what we've got now, I mean, it would take us a long time to figure out how it works, you know, particularly alien. You know, if it's truly alien, we wouldn't understand necessarily their physics, their understanding of physics. We wouldn't understand how their technology progressed, because, you know, our technology in many ways follows nature, right? You know, our technological models follow on nature. So if they had different biology or whatever, I mean, it would just, things would be different. We wouldn't really understand the way it's going. And the answer is yes. So, you know, I mean, we're seeing increasingly how this is starting to really rapidly unfold. You know, back in 2016, I don't think we really got a sense as much of where this was headed, because it really started to get nasty, I think, you know, around 2018 to 2019. And now we've got, you know, technology really being used against us. You know, like I said, the social credit scores and COVID passes and, you know, these contact tracing and all this kind of stuff, you know, everything is surveillance. But, you know, another thing that I would argue is that we've already hit peak tech. We're not going to see all the things that they're promising. Nobody's going to Mars. Nobody's going to have a robot body. You know, this stuff is not going to happen. And, you know, the thing that I keep saying, and I think people are starting to get the message now, because we've had like the supply chain failures, and we've had a lot of things going on. And, you know, we've had the Great Resignation and so on. I think our technology is going to rapidly devolve. You know, I really honestly believe that. And that's one of the reasons why I just can't get too heavily involved with crypto, because crypto really relies on, you know, a rocket ship internet, you know, a worldwide, state-of-the-art, high-tech, highly tuned internet. And if we don't have that, we don't have crypto. You know, I mean, it's just the way it's going to be. So I'm sure going to alienate some people by saying that, but it's really the way I think. And one of the other problems that I keep talking about is like, they're talking about the infrastructure bill and stuff. Well, the thing is that infrastructure is not self-sustaining. Infrastructure does not repair itself. I mean, in the past 10 years where I live, we've had a number of extended blackouts, blackouts for more than a week. And some that happened like when it was really cold out, and it was like really nasty. And we ended up buying a generator. But, when the power goes out, you need people to go up in those cherry pickers in the middle of a driving rainstorm or an ice storm or a snowstorm or whatever, and fix the damn wires. You need people who are not only smart, but brave. You know what I'm saying? And I don't know, man. I don't think that we're really replenishing that population. We're not replenishing that aspect of our gene pool, so to speak. I mean, I think we're in major trouble, and the trouble is going to become more and more apparent.
But Chris, do you think, I agree with you, we've hit the wall. Do you think the elite, as some say, have the real technology, or is that smoke and mirrors? Breakaway civilization, healing pods, and all that good stuff?
No. I think that's all, like propaganda. It's the same way those fake Boston Dynamics robots videos, when they're doing parkour and the Watusi and the peppermint twist and the bump. I mean, just all these nonsensical videos with these stupid robots that can barely stand up by themselves, that have to be remote controlled. You have to sit there and go, move around. Blah, blah, blah.
But Sophia is real, right?
Stop.
You rarely see the hand up at the back.
But the thing that I keep saying, and people who have heard a lot of my interviews are going to know exactly where I'm going with this, but it's just like, so much of this science fiction science that we're hearing was really because of Jeffrey Epstein. Epstein's money was driving this. Epstein had this like childish sci-fi mentality that he was projecting onto actual science, and he was basically paying all these people. I mean, we're talking about Harvard, MIT, I mean, all these big institutions, to pretend that his fantasies would ever be realized. And they're not. I mean, it's, I've been listen, I'm old, I'm 55. I'm going to be a grandfather soon, and I've been hearing these stories for a long time. And it's always like, oh, they've got something hidden. They're going to pull it out when they do this and they do this. And it's like, yeah, you know what? I've been hearing those stories since I was 10. All right. And it's just not going to happen. I mean, we're not going to have bases on the moon, and, we're not going to have robot bodies, and there isn't going to be a singularity, and just
flying car.
Yeah.
Flying car.
The Jetsons, yeah.
I just been hearing this stuff, since the 70s. All right. And I don't believe it anymore. I just don't. And since I keep an eye on like the pop science press and like things like Pop Mechanics and everything like that, and Live Science and just all science alert, all these things, ever since whatever happened to Epstein happened, that stuff has just really fallen off precipitously. You don't see those kind of stories anymore. These just crazy comic book stories anymore. And I just realized that science, they're the biggest liars of all. I was watching this old Carl Sagan interview, and he's talking about scientists like they're the new priesthood. And it's like, well, listen, the old priesthood, they're nothing to write home about either. So.
They had their tricks, phony voices from the statues and all that fun stuff.
Yeah, it was sad because he was very sick at the time, and I think he was just sort of clinging on to this notion, that he'll leave behind this legacy of science as salvation, and nobody believes in that anymore. And like I said, I mean, we've hit peak tech. And I'll tell you, it's like every day I'm dealing with like every upgrade that I'm getting with all these software programs that I get, that you have to, they download them into your computer now. You can't even say no anymore.
No,
right?
They just do it.
And they just get worse and worse and worse. And I'll tell you, I mean, it's like, I wish I had a dime for every minute I spend watching that stupid spinning rainbow wheel. It's just out of control. So,
but Chris, if something happened in Roswell, and I like how you point out the alleged crash happened near the town of Corona. Of course, it had to be. And you wrote that in 2016. Oh, what a coincidence. There was some ritual, whether with Ultra Spectrum, we're getting John Keel and Jack Valet, but can't they do that again, or have they just pissed off the gods? I mean, can we get that magic back?
My theory is that whatever was behind this, and I know this is where I start to get very Keel or very Valet about it. You know, whatever was behind this had a certain set of goals in mind that wanted to get us to a certain point, you know, where we can be controlled. And once we're under that control, you know, the technological rug will sort of be pulled out from underneath us. And the only technology there will be is surveillance, you know, surveillance and medical control. I think that we're looking down the barrel of that. I mean, it's like, I'm fully expecting there not to be like the internet as we know it today in 15 years. You know, I think it served a certain purpose, and it will be gradually dismantled.
We'll have meta. I mean, that's the salvation, right?
This is exactly. See, this is like that's a great.
What did Bocephus calls it? The LARPalypse or something like that. It's just LARPing a lot.
See, but this is a great example because that's almost like what I'm talking about in microcosm, right? So Mark Zuckerberg's this kind of guy, you know, admittedly a smart guy, admittedly a guy that they had their eye on for quite some time, right? Because he was involved in these programs that, you know, what was it, like gifted youth programs that a lot of people that we hear about today were in. But, you know, he was sort of handed the keys to this whole Facebook empire, you know, and it was all technology that was worked out. It was all beta tested elsewhere, you know, and there were other people that were really doing most of the actual programming work for him. So, you know, he built this empire, and then he ended up buying all these other companies like, you know, like Instagram and that other one that I never used, but
WhatsApp, I think.
Yeah, WhatsApp and all this kind of stuff. So he ended up being able to buy these other companies out, but you know, he's not a bright guy. He's not. I mean, he's bright in that he's technologically gifted, but it's almost like a savant kind of deal. And you see that, you just see the savant in him is just so apparent when you watch that meta video, you know? I mean, it's uncomfortable when you watch. I mean, it reminds me of like, I don't know, like somebody really deep into the spectrum trying to come across as being like an actual human being or something. I don't know. Like, you know, they always use the term data, you know, because they always refer to data, and it's really true. But meta is going to be a disaster. It's going to be an absolute disaster. I mean, I don't think it's going to work at all. People just haven't even been talking about it. Like it hasn't created any buzz. You know, it hasn't created any excitement. I think the technology just isn't there. You know, and the one problem with VR that they've never been able to cope with, because it's just a basic anatomical issue with, you know, the structure of our eyes and our optic nerves, is VR sickness, you know, which is basically just motion sickness, you know. The VR thing is like, it's like trying to read a book in a car, you know, like when you're in traffic or something. No, it's actually true. You know, it's the same exact process.
Inner ear and vision aren't matching. And that's the problem.
Exactly. And it's, I think it's just going to be a disaster. I would imagine that Facebook as an entity is going to go into a very steep decline. And this meta thing was sort of like a Hail Mary pass to sort of counteract that. But I mean, you're on Facebook. It's just, it feels like you're at a wake, you know? I mean, all the groups that I used to be in, it's just, there's no energy left. And I'm not talking like, you know, groups with like people our age. I'm talking like, you know, groups that like younger people were into, because all the millennials have just jumped ship, you know? They're not on that. They're all on Instagram, whatever. And, you know, it's like, because Facebook is where you get, you know, your grandmother is, you know? Yeah. But I think that's a very important arc. And it ties into what I'm talking about. And that's why I sort of talk about it as like being this microcosm, because You know, just as Zuckerberg was handed the keys to this technological empire, you know, we as humanity were handed the keys, so to speak, to this high technology that we didn't really truly understand the ramifications of, and how it was going to play out, you know, socially and psychologically and even physically. And now we're starting, you know, the honeymoon is over. The honeymoon is well and over. You know, the whole idealistic sort of Wired magazine, Kevin Kelly evangelism that you saw so much of in the 90s, you never hear anymore. And the people who were pushing that stuff, I mean, I'm talking people like Jaron Lanier and Douglas Rushkoff and so on. I mean, they're like the biggest Cassandras of all now, you know? I mean, a lot of these people who were really at the forefront of like the whole Mondo 2000 thing and all this kind of cyberpunk stuff, I mean, they are the biggest Cassandras of all. I mean, they're like, get the hell off of social media, you know, all this kind of stuff. So here we go. But you know, lest this all sounds too grim, and it does. But I mean, like I said, I think that when these powers that are using technology as a medium, when they're starting to get really active, it just creates like this Newtonian reaction in the spirit realm, so to speak. And it's like, I really believe this. And I know people, I don't even like really believe it. It's like I experiencing it, you know, I experiencing this phenomenon on a regular basis. And so it isn't even a belief anymore. I mean, is that gnosis? I don't know. You know, it's like, I don't know, where does like mysticism end and gnosis begin? I don't know. But you know, that's why I'm not, you know, sticking my head in the oven right now.
Yeah, definitely interesting times too. So what we have, and I just want the audience, I will have links to Lucifer's technologies, but I want to get a picture of what was happening. Roswell, and then you had Bell Labs through Vannevar Bush, who's like the architect of our modern technology and time, sort of really optimized this incredible magic for our times. And now we're in a period of decline. Of course, I'm sure there's a lot of missing pieces if you want to let me know, Chris, but what do you think too about, and I know that's something you and like Gordon used to talk with, you know, the war in heaven and the king is dead, with Rockefeller dying, all these little fools, Clintons, Trumps, Gates fighting over the kingdom, but they're actually doing more damage and they're completely just, you know, botching things up.
Yeah, I'm actually surprised by how incompetent they are, you know, because they picked Gates to sort of be their front man, but Gates is like, I mean, talk about being deep into the spectrum, you know, and then, you know, the whole thing with him and Epstein come out and like this, all these weird connections that he has. And, you know, plus he's not a good salesman. You know, he's not somebody who is appealing to the general public. You know, the media kisses ass because they have to, but who's going to follow him on some crusade? And, you know, I think that was a real major mistake on their part. But look what they did with the UFO thing by picking Tom DeLonge, you know, this washed up punk rock star who made all his money writing songs about farts, you know. I mean, it's just, and then he, you know, they put him on Rogan, and he just, it was one of the most embarrassing spectacles I've ever seen in my life. And I'm not exaggerating. That was cringe plus ultra, you know what I mean? That was just so cringy. And then I guess they put, you know, Luis Elizondo, you know, they're trying to make him the front man, and it's just not going to work. People just aren't interested. And this is why I'm always telling people, a lot of people in the conspiracy realm frustrate me, because they tend to subscribe to this sort of comic book, you know, Left Behind, straight to video movie way of thinking, that the people who are doing all these things, you know, the people at the top of the pyramid and so on, are superhumans and that they're infallible. And when they fuck up, they meant to, you know, it's like their fourth dimensional chess. And I hear this all the time, and it's just like, no, they're just not that smart, you know. they have technology. They have all the money in the world because money has been fake for quite a long time. It's probably been fake since we got off the gold standard, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, money, it's just fake. It's conjured out of nothing. And they're just not that smart. They really aren't. And, particularly since they've had the easiest lives in human history. They've never been tested. They've never been challenged. If you look back and, people like, Teddy Roosevelt or something, this guy who had battlefield experience, there used to be that if you really wanted to become at the top of the pyramid, you have to have proven yourself in battle. I mean, look at all the seasons and so on. So we're really at this like decadent, sort of degenerate phase of empire where the ruling figures are either incredibly old and senile and will not relinquish their power, right? I'm talking like people like Soros and Buffett and all these kind of people who sort of keep their fingers on the scales, as far as the exchange of money and so on. And then just below them, you have these like Gates and so on. Then you have people like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and everything. And none of these people can communicate with actual human beings. They can't communicate with people outside their economic class. They just don't understand it. They've never had that experience. They've never been wanting. They don't know what it's like to go hungry. They don't know what it's like to worry about paying your mortgage. I mean, ever in their lives, and neither have their parents or their parents' parents. So we're really in this. It really is. It reminds me, of the Roman Empire just before the crisis of the 3rd century, because you had these exact same conditions. And, you had the Roman legions just being manned by Germans because Roman men were so softened and pampered that they'd become, basically become imbeciles. And, we see this today. So technology is not, it's certainly not a panacea. And it's not, it's not the ring of power, okay? It's not like Lord of the Rings. It's a very mixed blessing at best. And I think that for these people at the top of the pyramid, the ruling class and so on, it's planted the seeds of their own destruction, It's made them so powerful and so unaccountable that there's nowhere to go but down, really.
Yeah, well, that's opportunity for those of us who are awake. Vance, do you have a question? Anything from the audience?
Oh, I've got a huge comment and 2 questions from the audience so far.
All right.
Let's see.
I'll be right back. I've got to let the cat out real quick. I'll be right back.
You got some time here.
All right.
All righty, Chris. Here's one for you from Wayne Matthias. How far do the psychos in charge believe AI, the singularity, can go? Not Sophia animatronic scam, obviously. Thanks.
This is something I've been talking about for years. I've had people who are involved in software engineering, programming, tell me, listen, AI is not what you think it is. It's certainly not what they make it out to be in the Hollywood movies. You're never going to have HAL. It's just algorithms are basically programs that are assigned to do single tasks and repeat and learn from their repetition. It's not anywhere close to human intelligence. They can play chess better than anyone else, but they can't do anything else. They can't cook an egg. They couldn't tell you what the Grateful Dead set list from 1969 at the Oakland Coliseum was. I mean, they're just not diversified in that respect. So I just read there was a big section in this electrical engineers website, this magazine for electrical engineers, and they're basically saying, we've come to the end of the line. The returns are diminishing, and we don't know where to go, because in order to create AI as it's been seen in the movies, like all this fake nonsense, like the Matrix and the Terminator movies and everything like that, you need computing power just so far beyond what we have now, but it's a level of computing power that the laws of physics just will not allow.
All right, here's another question. Are UAPs beings from other star systems or overlapping dimensions? That's from our friend Anon.
That's an excellent question. So my family and I, over 3 different occasions, had pretty close-up UFO encounters in 2015 and 2016. And the first one was my son was working at this big golf course that all these millionaires play at. And these 3 orbs just sort of parked themselves over the course at sundown. And, he had a pretty crappy phone, but he was able to take some sort of video of it. And they did not look like any kind of structured craft, certainly not from, another dimension or whatever. But the second one was my wife and I and my daughter were going up to my grandmother's 100th birthday party in New Hampshire, and we saw these 2 orange orbs sort of harrying this plane that had just taken off from Manchester Airport. And to me, when I was watching, I couldn't believe. Like, first of all, I'm like, wait a minute, like, where the hell is this coming from? It's like, oh, there it is. They were clearly under, for what I could see, under intelligent control, but there was no structure there. They were just balls of light, but the way they were moving just seemed intelligent and coordinated, right? And then I guess 2017, I'd seen a sort of a classic chevron UFO basically hover over our neighborhood for quite some time, and it was super, super bright too. And we try to get pictures of it and stuff. We got a couple pictures that aren't too bad, but it's very hard to take pictures of something at night, something in the sky, unless you have really good equipment, which most people don't have. But I was looking at that, and it did look structured, right? But it didn't look even remotely aerodynamic. It didn't look like anything that could possibly fly, and it wasn't really even flying. It was just sort of hovering and just moving in these lateral motions, up and this way and this way and that way and everything like that. And I was just like, I don't think, since it's not really obeying the laws of physics, is it even really there? Is it like, you start to get very keel about it, is this something from the super spectrum, and,
Projected,
I don't know. It was just really, but it was really big too. And it was really big and it was really bright. And I'm just standing there in the middle of my yard, at midnight, just watching this thing. And I'm just like, I've gone my whole life without seeing these things and being, I was interested in ufology for quite some time. And all of a sudden, like seeing them one after the other, it's just really bizarre. But I'll tell you, it kind of like cured me of my interest in ufology, because I don't know, I didn't get a good feeling. Like, I wasn't thinking, oh, those are demons from Dimension X. I was just thinking, like, whatever intelligence is guiding this stuff just doesn't care about us at all. Just doesn't even acknowledge us. And that's the thing, when you notice, when you start reading UFO reports, it's just like, whatever is behind this intelligence just really doesn't care about us. If it is something from another planet, which I doubt, but it's possible, they're just watching us like we watch wildlife, right? And it could possibly be something from under the ocean. You hear that a lot. I mean, that's certainly possible. I don't know.
90% is undiscovered of the ocean. Like Pacific Rim, the movie. There might just be there. We wouldn't even notice.
No, we wouldn't. So I just have to plead ignorance on that. I mean, it could be any one of those things. I don't believe,
or multiple, or both.
Yeah, I just don't believe that they're extraterrestrial starcraft from other systems, from other galaxies or constellations or whatever.
All right, here's one.
Spirits is hitting the desk right now. How dare, Chris? What do you?
Here's one.
Real quick, real quick, Chris. What do you think of the idea of? I don't know if you've read Jason Reza Giordani's Close Encounters, and I don't know, Gigi Jung also talked about it. The idea of these Nordics from the 19th century who've bent time, and they're sort of went back to Atlantis, went to Mars, and it's a very self-closed loop, but it's humans all along.
Not what I saw.
Yeah,
not what I saw. I mean, the things that I saw, it's just.
But so you would say I've had an encounter like yours in Portugal and Sintra with the lights, and you would say it's more mystical. It's definitely from somewhere else that's unexplainable.
I would say it's ultra terrestrial, like it's interdimensional, and that's why, one of the reasons why I revisited this series is when I discovered Carl Raschke's his paper on ultra terrestrials and cultural deconstruction. When I read that, I was like, oh, that's the final piece, because that's really what I see. I mean, let's just say that this thesis is correct, and I'm sure it's incorrect on a lot of details, but let's just say this thesis is correct. What Raschke argues is that this intelligence that he calls ultra-terrestrial is intruding on us, on our reality, because it wants us to bring us up to its reality. And when I read that, and sort of the way he phrased it, all I could think about was the DMT trials and the machine elves, and just all these experiences with ayahuasca, and just really powerful psychedelics where people report rather consistently entering into another dimension and encountering a rather consistent description of elves, gremlins, I mean, whatever you want to call them. So I think that what I think is behind this ultimately is ultra-terrestrial, and it's something that can't enter our reality physically, but can enter our reality through us, that our minds and souls are the medium, or our consciousness is the medium for these beings to enter into our reality. And the thing that kind of was rather like unsettling about this is that after I read that, I was thinking back on what Nick Redfern had written about the Collins elite and their theories about these UFO knots were demons and were just basically trying to trap us and imprison us in their dimension for all eternity or whatever. I mean, again, there are a lot of debates about whether that even the Collins elite actually really exists. But I think the basic argument, definitely is consistent with what, like I said, what Raschke was talking about, and maybe what Keel was talking about, and maybe what Jacques Vallée was talking about in Messengers of Deception. I think this is very consistent through line.
Yeah.
That these intelligences are interacting with us through our consciousness. Okay, and I think that that's a very scary thing, and that's what concerns me, that we have this convergence of the high technology, which is becoming increasingly intrusive, and the this UFO cultism, right, among people in high positions of power, and also MK Ultra 3.0. I think that's a witch's brew. That's a deadly combination. It's like a 1, 2, 3 punch that I'm very concerned about, and I think other people should be as well. And this is why, listen, I this whole thing with the vaccinations and so on, I think that it's been a lot more Keystone Cops than people want to admit on either side of the debate. I think that I think that there's been a lot of blundering, but there could be an ultimate agenda there to sort of condition us through just this constant stream of inoculations for anything, and that would have an effect on our physiology and our brain chemistry, But I'll tell you the other thing that does really concern me as well is this, particularly last summer, and particularly up in Portland, when you just saw these people, these meth heads, who just, for all intents and purposes, were behaving in a way that you would expect to see Linda Blair behave in an Exorcist sequel. You know what I mean? you just saw this the other day with that Kyle Rittenhouse thing. Some woman just starts Linda blaring out on the sidewalk, and people were like terrified because she was banging her head against the
So she was having an epileptic shock. Poor thing.
Well, somebody had said that it wasn't epileptic because
Oh, really?
there are certain markers of an epileptic fit that she
Oh,
wasn't
wow.
displaying, that it was something else. So, I mean, I don't know. I'm not a medical expert on epilepsy or whatnot, but, we're just seeing this more and more, and just seeing like the way these people look, and also the way they talk and the way they act. I mean, it's really frightening, and it's being exacerbated, by people certainly in the corporate media, who want there to be more conflict and want there to be more violence because it's good for ratings. It's good for clicks.
Give us dirty laundry.
Mm-hmm. If it bleeds,
the energy up.
If it bleeds, it leads.
Exactly. Yeah, Vance. Yeah, sorry I interrupted. Any other questions? There's a lot of secret sunners there, so I want to.
Yeah, we got like 4 questions.
Interact with Chris.
Yeah, I wanted to lay this on Chris. This is a theory I've had for many years now, being in the midst of Silicon Valley and technology and so forth for years myself. Still am, actually. I have a theory that all this huge explosion of technology is actually a quote unquote natural phenomenon of something trying to assemble the next form of life that's going to spring from this planet, or at least cover the planet. You know how, like, if you follow at least somewhat the theory of evolution, where we had cells and they got together and they made community cells and then organisms and so forth, and eventually human beings, which are supposedly intelligent. Well, now, ever since we networked ourselves together with the internet, right? Now we've created the very beginnings of a giant brain, and it's not the technology that's the brain. It's linking all of us together through kind of a digital nervous system. And now this thing has its own intelligence that we can't relate to. We can only see the effects of it. And people like Zuckerberg that look like they're zombies, that they are absorbed in this brain. And if you've ever been in Silicon Valley and see the craziness, people will do anything to develop their product and get the venture capital. And, it's just like all out. It doesn't matter. Money doesn't even matter. You know how much money the venture capitalists just waste? They just throw and throw money and like see what sticks to the wall. Well,
money is fake. That's why. I mean,
what's that?
Money is no longer real. Money doesn't represent anything anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, it's absolutely true.
Yeah. So what's really happening is this organism is assembling itself, and there might even be several of them competing with each other. But I think there's another level of intelligent organization. Organizations are just intelligent, period, to one degree or another. What do you think of that?
Like an egregore, Vance?
Yeah, very much like an egregore. Only a technobiological egregore.
No.
That's basically, the same argument as the singularitarians. I mean, I don't know. I can't
Singularians.
I don't think there's a name
like
yet.
Kurzweil. That's, the
Kurzweilians, yeah.
That's the same kind of argument that they would make. And, I mean, really what it gets down to is that, you're basically talking about AI, ultimately. I mean, that's what it's, this is the whole idea that life forms are going to evolve from carbon-based life forms into silicon-based life forms, and so on and so forth. I personally don't believe that. I think that, I don't want to say it's impossible, but I think that the laws of physics ultimately argue against it. And the problem also is that the intelligence that you're describing, right? I can't talk tonight. The intelligence that you're describing is unbelievably fragile, ultimately, because if there is like a mass coronal solar event, it's done. If there's
that's for sure.
There's a polar shift, it's done. If there's if there's really like a major, like Black Death kind of plague that kills 7/8 of humanity, it's done. Okay. You know, I mean, there are so many ways that that life form that you're describing could just be instantly annihilated, instantly in the grand scale of time, be annihilated.
It
I,
doesn't know that though.
it might not, but no, I mean, I just don't believe that. I think
Yeah.
that we've been so conditioned by Hollywood. You know, I think that Hollywood has been the great sales force for this mythology of unending technological revolution. Like I said, I think that we've peaked. I think we peaked a while ago. I actually had somebody tell me that, like, computing power, you know, the whole thing with Moore's law, you know, doubling
Yes.
speed, so on. So that Moore's law was broken like 16 years ago, back in the early 2000s. That it basically no longer applies. And, you know, you can see that. I mean, I can see that with this equipment that I'm on now, you know, and I told you that these upgrades that they force you to take, that they force you to accept, just get worse and worse and worse. I mean, you know, so here's a great example. So I used to have like multiple browsers up, you know, different browsing packages up, and I would have like, you know, be doing different things, you know, and I can't do that anymore. I can only have one active browser up at a time because they freeze each other out. You know, I mean, is that just my computer? I don't know, but the same computer used to have, you know, no problem. I mean, I run, you know, like first aid and everything on this machine here pretty frequently, but I think it's the software. I think the software itself is the problem, and I think at the other end of that problem is the human problem. And I think that it's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy, because you know that whole thing about, like, you know, hard men make good times make weak men make hard times, you know, blah 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 blah.
Yeah.
I think it's sort of like almost like a version of that like excessive technology weakens us. Excessive technology and reliance on technology weakens, you know, it demonstrably and provably weakens like our recall, you know what I'm saying, our attention spans. You know, there are all sorts of neurological effects that this technology has on us. And people who've grown up on this technology and know nothing else, you know, A, take it for granted, and B, have like an enormous sense of entitlement, and C, like, just don't realize that this stuff has to get fixed. You have to fix this stuff, you know. It breaks down, you know, the infrastructure breaks down. Look at what we just saw in the Fraser Valley in Vancouver. I mean, the highway that the entire island of Vancouver relies on was destroyed. Destroyed. You know what I'm saying? It's gone.
Yeah, I read about that.
How they're going to rebuild it.
They're cut off from Canada now, I heard.
So not only did it knock out the highway, but it also knocked out the rail. Okay? So if they're going to get anything as far as supplies, provisions, anything like that, it has to come by boat or by plane. You know, and it's like they can't leave. It's almost like some weird science fiction Stephen King, The Dome or whatever kind of thing. It's really surreal to see. And I'm telling you something. I mean, my whole mindset really began. I've said this in a number of different interviews as well, but like my whole mindset really began to change after Superstorm Sandy, you know, because I'd never experienced anything like that before. I'd never seen that kind of devastation before. In, you know, in this nice little well-to-do neighborhood looking like Berlin after the Blitz. I mean, just absolutely destroyed. You know, houses.
Yeah, you didn't have power for weeks. I remember you being
people
offline.
didn't have power for months. People were trapped in their houses because, you know, a tree had fallen in the middle of the house and they couldn't get out. I mean, it was insanity. I've never seen.
It's getting worse too, and it's getting worse with all the now PG&E out here in California says, oh, you know, if it's too windy, you have to shut the power off, and they're shutting down Diablo Canyon nuclear power plant, and they're trying to get you used to, well, you know, you're not going to have power sometimes, you know, rolling brownouts. They send us things out
like the Soviet Union
too, right?
Yep. The wildfires would turn into that. The winds start the fires, spread the fires, And they started the fires in some instances up in California. So now, because of the lawsuits, they're cutting the power off the first sign of wind. That's what they're doing.
Well, I'll tell you something. California just has too many damn people in it. It wasn't that strip, that little fertile strip of land in the middle of a moonscape desert was not meant to house 40 million people. All right. It's just the way it is. And the problems in California are going to get worse unless there's like a major depopulation, unless there's a major exodus. Because, I just saw this in the New York Times. It was like, they're talking about the Colorado River that 40 million people rely on in California. It's just like, it wasn't created, it doesn't exist to sustain the water needs of 40 million people.
Right. Water.
That is an historical insanity. There's never been that many people in that state.
And they keep building too. Isn't that funny?
Oh, I know. I saw it. Like, I was down in Orange County a couple of years ago, and it's just like they're just building houses on top. It looks like, it almost looks like a Brazilian favela, but just like really expensive. It's like house stacked on house on house on house. Anyway.
Yeah. Any other questions? In Vancouver,
we
need Snake Plissken's right now, but the Canadian version of Snake Plissken's.
Okay, we got one. Let's see. Here's one I know you like. What's the best way to purchase your books printed on paper? Alan Marcus wants to know.
Well, for now, Amazon. I'm kind of reliant on Amazon right now, unfortunately. I do want to diversify. I do want to start to use other avenues, more direct avenues. But for now, it's the only game in town, unfortunately.
All right. Top 3 occult books to read from Eric Alexander.
Well, let's see. I think you even have it here. Hold on a sec. This is the book you want to start with. All right. I'll just hold it up.
How do you pronounce that? Cairo.
Mysteries and Romances of the World's Greatest Occultists. All right?
And for those of you who are listening, this in audio is CHEIRO.
Okay. Because this book will, if you proceed with interest in the occult after you read this book, good luck to you. Basically, it's a book about how all the great occultists throughout history just met untimely or sorry ends. Died poor, died broke, and it was written before. We had people like Crowley and so on. So it's a great cautionary tale. So if you proceed with the occult after reading this book, then it's probably just your destiny. But it's the greatest. What's the word I'm even looking for? Greatest cautionary tale, let's say, about involvement in the occult. I've mentioned this book in a number of different interviews, but it was foundational for me. And it's very well written and it's very entertaining. But unfortunately, a lot of the entertainment just comes from just how badly these people screwed up their lives. It's kind of like an antidote to Colin Wilson in some ways. Colin Wilson, when he wrote The Occult, I have that book too. I think he had a little bit more of a starry-eyed view of it.
Who wrote Cairo? Who's the author?
Cairo. Let's see, what's his real name? He was he's one of these sort of very colorful figures that sort of straddled the occult and stage magic.
He's the author, and he titled the book by his own name.
Well, this is a reprint. The book is actually titled "Mysteries and Romances of the World's Greatest Occultists." But his name at one point when this book was published had sort of a cachet to it. That's what they titled it. But I've mentioned this book before. And I really think that if you are interested in the occult in any way, that you should read it as a wonderful cautionary tale. And then, read some, if you want to read more recently, read a book like A Strange Angel by George Pendle, which the was it Showtime? No, CBS. The CBS Direct series was based on. And I'll tell you, I watched an episode of that, and it was the most horrible thing that I've ever seen in my life. It was just,
Yeah, I heard it wasn't very good.
it was pathetic. But
On
if
a
you
lighter note, the Dune adaptation is pretty good, Chris.
oh, good.
It's passable. It's definitely passable. It's worth a watch.
I really, I'll tell you something.
And then I watched the Lynch one. It still sucks.
Oh, it's awful.
Oh,
The sci-fi one is really good. And if they did Dune and Children of Dune, I have them all on DVD, and they're really good. They're cheap looking. They're not really big budget, but story-wise and acting-wise and everything like that, they're really good. I really like them. So
same here.
I always want to, since I've seen Dune in these different iterations, I'm not really in any rush to see. Everybody says, you got to see it in the movie cinema and because of the sound design and everything like that.
No,
it's like, I don't like going to the movies anymore.
Yeah, it's fine. When you're ready, it's passable, it's honorable, it's good. It's worth a watch when you're ready. But yeah,
I heard it's a little dry though. I heard that it's a little, it's a little morose.
the trailers look like Game of Thrones to me. It's all like gray looking,
Yeah. I hate Game of Thrones. I do. Well, one of the reasons that, when I was a kid, my mother used to make us watch Masterpiece Theater because, that we were going to be educated, I guess. Cultured. I hated that shit so bad. I remember upstairs, downstairs, I wanted to just kill myself. I hated it so much. So whenever I hear those kind of stagey, London theatrical British accents, I run in the other direction. I really do. I can't stand listening to them. I'm talking those sort of posh, plummy,
rain fair kind of thing. Yeah.
Drives me crazy.
Did you ever play Dungeons and Dragons?
I didn't, and I probably should have, because I was really into Tolkien and all that kind of stuff, in the late 70s.
Mm-hmm.
And I was really into the Conan the Barbarian books, and I was really into John Carter, Warlord of Mars. I mean, just all that kind of stuff. I was reading a lot of that stuff, but I was really into the whole Tolkien thing. And I remember seeing the animated version of Lord of the Rings and so on. But the problem is that it just wasn't around, and we didn't have any kind of game stores or comic stores or anything like that. They didn't carry it in the bookstores. I wasn't even really aware of it until I started going to comic book stores in the early 80s, because you just didn't see it. It just wasn't around. I would have played it if it was. I would have loved it, but unfortunately it wasn't.
more questions here.
Right.
Let's see. Here's one from ancient times already. We've been catching up on the questions here. Opinions on synthetic biology. What's your opinion on that? Fake cells.
Well, here's the thing. I think a lot of things work on paper. A lot of things work theoretically. A lot of things the math works out. But it's a whole different equation when the rubber hits the road. When you actually have to make things not only work physically, but work to scale. You understand what I'm saying?
Yep.
You can sort of do these, these object lessons almost. When they talk about what they can do with particles and so on, they travel through time or whatever, But it's a big difference between having a particle be teleported to having a physical object be teleported.
Oh yeah. Economically too. Sometimes you can build a machine, but it takes $6 trillion to, toast your bread.
I just think that it's our narcissism and our delusionary belief in our powers. And one of the things that I've been saying a lot, when I talk about the ritualism, when I talk about the sorcery, the sorcery that I think is really in control of everything, I think that the people doing the actual spell casting and so on, are more bumblers than we give them credit for being. I think they're not nearly as godlike as, like I said, you see in too many conspiracy interpretations of it. I think that the spirit realm and the interaction with the supernatural drives more of what we see and what we experience, particularly with the system as we perceive it, than we give it credit for. And that runs counter to everything that we're told and everything that we're told to believe. But I honestly do believe it. I mean, it's something that I believe as much as I believe anything. I think that we are more subject to the powers, these powers over us that we don't necessarily even perceive, than we would like to think that we are.
That is scary.
But it seems one entity that has worked very well for the elite, and you've written about this over and over and over, and that's Mithras. He's definitely come through for the elite, and he just keeps not missing a beat. So
he's a lot of bull. He's a lot of bull.
Yeah, he is. He grabs the bull by the.
I've really come to the conclusion that Mithras is Lucifer. So when people talk about Lucifer, I think that they're talking about Mithras. Oh, we just lost.
Yeah, sorry. My camera fell. 1 second. Keep talking.
Okay, so no, and I can't really explain the exact lineage or mechanics of it, but I really do believe that, all the pieces are in place. Like, all the pieces are on the chessboard now, and they're going to, everything is where it's going to be, when this all plays out. And I really do believe that Mithras is Lucifer as we understand it. And I think really the tell there is that one of the great Mithraic icons is that of Phanes, the angel with the snake wrapped around it and so on.
Oh, yes, I remember seeing that.
Phanes is Greek for Lucifer. So it's basically the same name. And Lucifer is a title and not a name. I mean, this is something that I did a lot of research in, and I sort of hit a dead end with it until I sort of got onto this whole idea that, when people talk about the whole idea of Lucifer and Luciferians, that it is Mithras. And I think that one of the interesting tells here is that when Lucifer and Luciferians sort of re-entered the popular lexicon, that was in the 19th century with Leo Taxil, who had written a book on Freemasonry, and that how are there these layers, and there were the Luciferians and the Satanists and all this kind of stuff. And the interesting thing about that is that was really at the time when we started seeing like this Mithras symbolism and iconography being used. So I think what happened is that it almost seems to be like maybe even like a limited hangout. Like Taxil was talking about this new Mithraist movement, like the neo-Mithraists, but he was sort of putting it into this context of Lucifer, which is sort of this historical scare word. But like I said, I think that Milton's Lucifer was Giordano Bruno, and I think that Satan in the Old Testament is part of the divine council. He's basically God's asshole prosecuting attorney, right? Because all those attorneys are assholes, right?
Exactly.
Lawyer, right? That's what Satan is. And then he becomes this different figure after the Babylonian captivity. But I think
Ahriman.
Ahriman and so on. But I think when Jesus and the apostles were talking about Satan, I think they were talking about the system, the satanic system. And I think that that really entails at that point in time Jupiter Ammon. And this is the thing that so I've always studied this Jupiter Ammon thing, because this is like Alexander the Great's pet god, and sort of shows up and then sort of becomes eventually becomes Baphomet, really. But I think that when Jesus talks about Mammon, you can serve God or Mammon, right?
No.
I think that Mammon was slang for Jupiter Ammon, right? Because it's just like you just add another M, and linguistically, that's not even a hop, skip, or a jump. It's just that's basically how language evolves. People just add little touches to it. So I do think that when Jesus talks about you can serve God or mammon, he's talking about Jupiter Ammon. Because if you go back and look at all the coins at the time, all the Roman coins were minted with Jupiter Ammon, either on the head or on the tail. And that would be like the god, the young god with the clean shaven face and the horns.
Right.
You've probably seen that, And actually, there are depictions of, even of Alexander in that incarnation. So I do think that that's what I think that Satan is the system, and the system is being personified by Jupiter Ammon. And I think that when that Jupiter Ammon sort of goes through this cycle of incarnations that ends up as Baphomet, I think that, Eliphas Levi probably understood that, I think that there was a body of secret knowledge, what this stuff really meant. Like, one of the things that I've coded is the goat of Mendes, the goat and the pentagram. And basically what that is, it's not even the conjunction, but it's basically Aries, which is the horns, and the pentagram is the tail of Cetus. And Cetus is Leviathan, and that's why Leviathan is written in Hebrew letters on the goat of Mendes. You see what I'm saying? I covered this on the Secret Sun Institute on my Patreon, and it's when you start just going, okay, everything is probably going to be the stars, right? It's a child's play, all these things that people have been puzzling over, like the eye of Providence, the eye of the dollar bill. That's basically a star map of Lyra. Okay. The eye of Ra, the Egyptian eye, as they call it. That's the conjunction of Ophiuchus and Scorpio, and you just see that because they called Ophiuchus in the Egyptian constellations, they call it the boat of Ra.
Right.
And that little curly Q is the tail of Scorpio. So I've covered this in pretty minute detail. But I just read something from Genesis today that I was just like, oh, because I've seen all this stuff like in the book of Revelation where it's just like, oh my God, this is all star maps, right? And then in Genesis 1:14, it talks about like, God put the stars in the sky for light, but also for signs and times. So basically, when I look at all this stuff in Revelation, I'm like, oh my God, this is like a star map. And it's probably, since they understood time by the stars, right? I mean, that's how the years, the passage of the months and the years and stuff with the movements of the constellations. And it's like, oh my God, that's why all this stuff is stars. But it goes all the way up into Freemasonry and so much of this occult symbolism that people have puzzled over. And it's just the stars. It's just star maps. I mean, I'm not exactly sure what the ultimate meaning of it is, but it's just so obvious, And it really ties in with this stuff that I'm talking about now, because Lucifer is Mithras. The whole thing about Lucifer and Mithras and on and on and on, it's about escaping the bondage of the gods or the bondage of God, right? It's about defying God, right? It's about defying the limitations of time. It's about achieving immortality and achieving apotheosis, right?
Exactly.
Well, what, you see this in the Tauroctony, so the Tauroctony is basically Perseus, the constellation of Perseus, killing the bull, and the bull imprisons you in the zodiac, the hours, that imprisons you in time. Okay, I mean, in the passage of time, right? Because the passage of the seasons, they represent the month, right? Aries, Taurus, Pisces, and so on and so forth. So you see Perseus rising up into the Milky Way, up into heaven, which is Cepheus, okay? And Cepheus is, if you look at the shape of Cepheus, that's really what church steeples are based on. Everybody goes, oh, they're based on obelisks. No, they're based on Cepheus. And it's very simple and obvious. And you just start to see the symbolism that it's all about escaping the prison of time. So Perseus is escaping the zodiac. He's rising, he's killing the bull, which is basically like keeping him imprisoned in the zodiac, and he's rising up to heaven, right? But this is the same symbolism with Saturn. Everybody goes, well, what's this Saturn? You hear all these like crazy kind of theories about Saturn. The thing about Saturn to the ancient world is that Saturn was the outermost planet. Saturn was the Stargate. Okay, Saturn was the gateway from the imprisonment of the archons, because the archons are the planets, right? Into, the wild black yonder, so to speak, into the stars, into the heavens, because heaven is the heavens, it's the stars. And if you could get past Chronos, Saturn, that's when you could escape into infinite time. And that's why Aeon, Leon Syntophilis, and in some versions, Phanes, aka Lucifer, represents infinite time in Mithraism. And so when we talk about Lucifer's technologies, I mean, when I wrote that series, I didn't realize just how literal that really was, because the driving force behind the microchip and all this kind of stuff, and you mentioned Vannevar Bush and everything, was AT&T, right? And AT&T was really, I mean, that was the phone company. Everybody used AT&T, right? But they were also putting all their money into all this. They were controlling the atomic plants and the atomic weapons. I mean, all these kind of things. They had their fingers in all these different pies, and also Bell Labs, right? But I saw this kind of up close because my wife used to work at AT&T World Headquarters, which was right down the street from me. Now it's in Dallas, right near Dealey Plaza. There you go, right? But that giant statue of Phanes was at the gate. I used to drive by that every day when I used to drop her off at work, And she went from AT&T to Bell Labs, and then they became Lucent, right? And that's when they adopted the red Ouroboros symbol as their as their logo. And that was actually, I mean, that whole thing was a disaster. But that's exactly what I'm saying, is that Lucent Technologies, when that came out, that was like everybody in like all conspiracy news group were like, oh my God, it's like they're invincible, they control the world, everything like that. And Lucent was gone within less than a decade. And actually we had sold our Lucent stock just before it became a penny stock. We'd sold it when it was like at $66. And my wife goes, oh, my boss says it's going to go up to $90. I'm like, no, sell it now.
Sell it.
And then like 2 weeks later, it was down to like 7 cents. So
damn.
Yeah. But the other interesting thing too is that that famous Mithras statue that I talk about, that's now 2 blocks away from Dealey Plaza at the AT&T Center in downtown Dallas, Texas. That used to be right across the street from Trump. Like Trump's right down the street from me all the time. I see these helicopters back and forth all the time. Yeah, Trump Bedminster is like 15 minutes from here.
Oh wow!
Like straight down the highway. So when AT&T was sort of like going into bankruptcy and reorganization, they had their world headquarters, which was pretty pathetic, but it was down in Bedminster, and it was right across the street from the entrance to Trump National.
Curiouser and curiouser.
Well, they love those symbols, man. It's the it's the religion. It really
and their rituals. I mean, as you've written, all this stuff with the penis rockets in space and everything else it's just star rituals so they can remain gods or find some sort of immortality, even as the house burns down around them.
Well, Elon Musk, I mean, he's not even trying anymore. He had the rocket launch on Imbolc, and then he had one on Beltane, and a couple other pretty significant dates. And it's just so obvious. And then like the whole thing with Jeff Bezos and Richard Branson. And this is really where I start to become like, so I mean, this is when my last sliver of belief in the space program just totally collapsed. It really was. Because it was just, you see Bezos's rockets, it's just these giant dicks. And everybody sees it. I mean, everybody sees it and just like, is this a joke? And yeah, exactly. Exactly what that person's saying there. And then, Branson has the flying uterus, the flying uterus, and the fallopian tubes for the wings and so on. It was just a big sex ritual. And so these guys, I mean, Richard Branson, Jeff Bezos, like what, he makes $1 million a minute or something crazy like that. I mean, none of it's real, obviously, but at least on paper, he's like worth $160 billion or something. So he's worth $160 billion, and this guy's been working on this stupid program, this Blue Origin program, for 20 years.
Blue Orgy.
Blue Orgy.
Blue Orgy.
Yeah, Blue Orgy is great. That's actually what it means, right? But so he has the big day, and this thing, it barely reaches the lower rungs of the upper atmosphere. 66 miles in the air is nothing. And people say that's space. I get so angry when they say that's space. Oh, we sent William Shatner into space finally. It's like, no, you didn't. You sent him on
a cloud.
You sent him on like a very expensive and fancy, parachute drop ride. Like at the amusement park, and you go straight up and then you drop and the parachute comes. That's all it is. It's a goddamn toy. And it's just like, oh my God, this is all fake. I don't know if I'm like ready to take that final step and like people go, the space station is fake and all that. I mean, I'm not I got over the whole Apollo thing a long time ago. There's no way that fucking ever happened. But like I said, I mean, these guys have all the time and the money in the world. And like they go up like a few miles higher than the U-2 spy plane did in the early 60s.
That's it. Yeah. There.
You know what I mean? It's pathetic. It's embarrassing. Yeah. And somebody on Twitter said something that it really made sense to me. Is like these rocket tests, and all this NASA stuff. It's really about missile testing. It's like a PR front for missile test. What they're really testing is ICBMs and so on. And all these kind of systems, these missile systems. But they do it under the guise of NASA and so on. So people don't question it. People don't say, why are they testing these missiles all the time? So,
used to be the other way. They developed the ICBMs and then they put the commercial stuff for the, the NASA stuff on top of them.
Or maybe it never was. Maybe it was always just it was always the defense. It was always Raytheon. It was always Lockheed and McDonnell Douglas and Martin Marietta, just testing those missiles, was getting all that Reagan Cold War money all along, the space race might have just been the Cold War missile race. It really makes sense to me because, I had a friend, somebody who's one of my patrons, really smart guy. And he worked on I think it was like a tuna fishing vessel. And they would throw out these huge nets, right? So he knew how much space like a net and rope took up. And he said what really got me off the whole Apollo thing is when I looked at those parachutes, and I was like, there's no way, it's literally impossible for those parachutes and all that rope to fit into the overhead goddamn compartment of these stupid little capsules. There's just no way. Because I forget the the geometry of it was like, what was it, like 24,000 square feet of nylon just in those parachutes for those Apollo capsule landings. And it was something like 6,000 feet of rope. I just imagine what 6,000 feet of rope looks like.
Very thin. Fishing line, very thin fishing line.
It's so clear to me that they just dropped those things from C-130s, right? And because there's no possible way that all that nylon and rope could have fit into those tiny little space capsules, quote unquote space capsules. So I don't know. I mean, I'm like, I'm a lot more conventional than I think I get credit for. But when you really start to look at the details, and you start to work on the math on not only an Apollo, but all this other stuff, it's just like, it can't exist. It's like this, getting back to the whole thing with AI. One of the things that I've read is that one of the problems with the computing power is that it creates heat. There's all this heat that needs to be cooled. You know, even with like all this digital solid state stuff, that, you know, you need cooling systems for this, and it cannot work. It cannot work. You know, they talk about like all the heat that Bitcoin mining takes up, right?
The power of a city.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, you know, the scale of that is just phenomenal. I mean, even just to like replicate the intelligence of a tsetse fly, it's just more. It takes more power than we're given credit for. And you know, this is when we're really not all that bad. I don't think we live up to our potential, and I think our technology is one of the reasons that we don't. You know, I think our over-reliance on technology, particularly things like television and so on, have really degraded our capacity, our intellectual capacities that we have and we used to have. You know, the example that I always give is that go to an old bookstore, go to a used bookstore, an antiquarian bookstore, and look at the children's books that they published 100 years ago. And just imagine anyone today reading one of those, having the patience to read one of those books. You know, I mean, it's just astonishing how far we've fallen in that. You know, it's like our reliance on technology, and it's getting worse too. I mean, it's getting worse with this Generation Z, you know, because not only they become over reliant on technology, but they've just become so indolent and entitled, and it's a deadly combination. And you see that in the work that they create, like the creative work that they do, whatever creative work is done. You know, if it's not TikTok videos, you know, animation looks terrible now. Comic book art looks terrible now. Music sounds great because it's all done digitally, but you know, there isn't that kind of. I mean, there are a lot. Don't get me wrong. There are a lot of very talented people who like go on YouTube and watch all these tutorials and stuff and learn how to do things. I mean, I'm not going to deny that, but I'm just talking like sort of like your basic native, average or ordinary capability is degrading. And I mean, one of the things I say is like, how are we going to have this massive technological infrastructure when you've got a generation of people that don't know how to change the tire on a car? You know, they can't boil an egg. They can't tell time on a traditional clock. You know what I mean? There are all these things that they just can't do anymore. And
not to mention the stick shift is dead.
Chris did mention that, and everybody got really pedantic on Facebook. Like, well, we don't need stick shifts. And Chris is like, you're missing the point.
Yeah, I mean, it's not the point. The point is like, you need people to have complex mechanical skills to maintain the infrastructure that we rely on. And without that, there is nothing. And that's the thing that scares me. I mean, that thing, I'm not kidding. That really honestly scares me. The fact that we're going to be reliant, you know, particularly guys like us who are getting a little long in the tooth, we're going to be reliant on all these kids, you know, a lot of whom, I mean, who frighten me how common like Asperger's and autism spectrum disorders are. I got to tell you something, like 10 years ago on this block, there were 5 kids on my block that were, you know, either mildly or seriously autistic. 5. All right. And then there was a kid on the next block over. So within, you know, 5-minute walking distance of my house, there were 6 kids who were fairly seriously on the spectrum. And it's a lot more common than people think, and it's frightening. And a lot of people who aren't like deep into the spectrum have, you know, anxiety disorders. They're very common, but also just like the sense of entitlement is terrifying. You know, people quitting their jobs. I mean, I understand why people quit their jobs, and like, listen, I'm almost like, when it comes to stuff like that, I'm almost like a socialist. You know, it's like I'm like Mr. Economic Justice. It's like, you know, pay me my fucking money. You know, it's like pay people to do their work. You know, and stop being so fucking greedy. You know, but at the same point in time, it's just like, if people aren't going to work those jobs, that require not only like hard work, but also fairly sophisticated levels of intelligence, like maybe like 110, 115 IQ, right? Just to get through the day. I don't know how things are going to work. And, we can't immigrate. Everybody goes, oh, we'll just, import more workers and stuff. First of all, birth rates are falling everywhere. Right?
Everywhere.
They're falling all over the world, right? Second of all, in industrialized countries, particularly in Asia, I mean, they're not even at like -0, right? I mean, they were like well into negative population growth. I mean, I'm talking Korea, Japan.
Japan is going to go extinct. The Japanese
Yeah.
are going to go
But
extinct.
even, China, I mean, Thailand, Singapore, I mean, all these countries, we have people who are very capable, technologically, pretty smart people, and their birth rates are just cratering. So, where are these people going to come from? I mean, you can import all the people you want to do menial work, to pick up garbage or paint your house or sweep your floors or, stuff like that. But like I said, maintaining this infrastructure is going to be tough. So we're going to reach a point where like it's going to become inaccessible. And, it's going to work its way up or down the economic ladder, however we choose to look at it. So poorer people are going to start to lose access to high technology, and then the working class, and then the lower middle class, and then the middle class, and the upper class. And it's going to get to the point where the upper class and the rich are going to be the only ones who have the luxury of access to high technology, access what we take for granted every day. And that to me almost seems, that's when I start to get like, what would be the end goal? Like, what's the whole point of this? What's the whole point of this Lucifer's technologies kind of program? Restoring
population. Maybe they want to
population,
whatever,
but it's just like, it's almost like a return to medievalism. It's a return to it's feudalism plus. You understand what I'm saying? Because only people who are wealthy are going to be able to afford what we take for granted now, if present trends continue. I mean, I'm hoping they don't. I hope we're going to get off this treadmill. I mean, I don't know exactly how we are. I think that, at some point in time, this boil that keeps growing on the body politic is going to need to be lanced, right?
I hope so.
That answers the question Hunter Hutchins had for you. What hope you have for the future?
Well, see, I have hope for the future, like I said, because I have, I truly believe in the spiritual world, in the spirit world. I believe in the spirits. I think that if you can get away from your programming, your social programming, and just go outside, you'll be just astonished, because you can be walking in the forest alone and feel like you're in Grand Central Station, because not only are there like the spirits of living creatures, but there are nature spirits and the spirits of the dead. I mean, it's just everywhere. We just don't we've lost the ability to connect with that. That I'm not going to say all our ancestors had it, but I think mystics have had it, and maybe cultures that are more mystically minded than our own. It's like, I mean, I am a mystic. That's how I describe myself. I have a very mystical bent. My understanding of the world is mystical, and I very much believe in being able to experience and access the spiritual world. I think there are a lot of ways you can do that. And, music is a great way, being in nature. I mean, there are just all sorts of ways that have been very reliable ways to access the spiritual world that were taken for granted for thousands of years. And the other thing too is that, when you talk about like the world of angels and demons and so on, it's just like, go back and read like Plato, or go back and read Socrates, all these like brilliant Greek philosophers and stuff. They took the spirit realm for granted. They didn't, they didn't have debates about whether or not it existed. They just understood that it did. You know what I mean? And it's something that just people who were very, very smart, people who were educated from very early age and educated the hard way, you know what I mean? Not educated like we are today. They took the reality of the spirit world for granted. They took the reality of the supernatural for granted. And I think that we really need to rediscover that. You know, I think that that is part of the way out of this mess, because what the system, what that Luciferic system that we're talking about, that Ahrimanic system, you know, wants to do is that it wants to divorce us from that, you know, and it's been doing so for a very long time. You know, it's been using fake science and fake money and all these kind of things to get us away from that connection that's really our birthright. And not only our birthright, but it's something that, you know, I think a lot of children take for granted or used to take for granted, you know. I mean, I just think it's, I mean, listen, you know, if you spend time in nature, you realize that, you know, this is a tough world, you know. I mean, being alive is you know, death lurks around every corner, right? You can never take anything for granted, you know, but it's like, that's just part of the cycle, you know. I mean, I'm not even like, I'm just so convinced of the reality of reincarnation that it's not even a question for me. And I'll tell you, sometimes I wish I wasn't, because like I got to be honest
You got
with
to come back.
well, at this point in my life, it's like the whole idea of oblivion, like of eternal rest, is very appealing to me. You know, it's like,
I know.
oh, okay, yeah, I can
Yeah.
just turn off. You know, that sounds great.
Yeah, I'm out of here.
But no, I mean, I genuinely believe in the survival of some. I mean, I don't know what to call it. You know, it's not like I'm trying to just hedge and because I don't know what it is, and it's just sort of like this nebulous. I mean, I definitely believe in the survival of some very strong essential part of who we are. And I'll tell you, sometimes, I mean, I've had experiences that I wish that wasn't true either. You know, I think that you know, it's not sunshine and roses the way it might be portrayed in some regards. But you know, I just take it for granted. And I just think that just reconnecting with that spiritual world and then realize that it isn't like something that's nebulous and airy fairy and, you know, oh, wouldn't it be nice, you know, some sort of supposition. It's just the way, it's just logic, you know. The world is alive, the world is living, you know, the world is filled with sentience, you know, not only just people but animals and plants and I mean even rocks. I mean, I don't know. It's just, the world is alive. It's just it's teeming with energy. It's teeming with life. It's teeming with power. And the system, for at least the past 150 years, has been trying to beat that out of our heads. You know. And I got to tell you something. You know, not only have I gotten off the space train, right? You know, the space colonization train. But I've gotten off of the whole idea of Darwinian evolution too. I watched these videos of these two, a guy named David Galertner, who was actually, he was victimized by the Unabomber. I think he had like his arm blown off or something.
Oh, wow.
And so him and this other guy named David Belinsky, they're both like high level mathematicians. And they're both just like, Darwin is impossible. Darwin didn't know about DNA. You know, all these things about, he talks about mutations. They're so mathematically unlikely as to be less than impossible. You know, it's just like, it just cannot happen. You know, he just didn't understand the basics of genetics because it wasn't available to him. And I really do wonder if like even the people teaching Darwinian evolution even really believe it. I don't think they do. I just think it's a political statement at this point in time. You know, whether or not you believe in Darwinian evolution isn't about science. I think it's about politics. And, you know, the way that Berlinski and Galertner laid it out, I don't think that any rational person could disagree with them. But it is part of, you know, it is part of like the demoralization process. You know, I think that, you know, the whole idea of Darwin evolution and just like, oh, there are like 10 trillion galaxies, you know. You aim the Hubble at this little postage stamp size of space, and there's like 10 trillion galaxies. It's like, first of all, we're never ever fucking going there. We're not even ever going to Mars. Nobody's going to Mars ever. Okay, ever. So what does it matter? What does it even matter if there are 10 trillion galaxies out there? Because we're never going to contact these people. You know, they've been trying to find intelligent life in the galaxy, whatever, you know, for 100+ years now. But why? You know, one of the things I say, like, if we ever did meet aliens, we would want to murder them immediately. We would, because we would hate the way they smelled. You know, just that primal sort of instinct in us, you know, that reptilian brain that we have, like that survival instinct that we have, we would smell them and recognize them as being from outside our biosphere even. And we would perceive it as a threat. And we would just want to murder them. And it's absurd to think anything else, you know? I mean, just look at the way that other human beings act towards other human beings, you know? It's just, it's hardwired into us, you know? It's part of our survival instinct. So worrying about UFOs and all this other kind of stuff is pointless. You know, certainly worrying about, I don't know, 10 trillion galaxies, a trillion light years away. Who cares? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It has no effect on your life.
That's why I kind of gave up ufology after a while, because, all right, what do you have to tell me? What's useful that you're going to have to tell me? What wisdom do you have for me? It's just, oh yeah, we're here. There's abductions of this and that. It's the same old thing. And I'm not learning anything. What good are you? You know?
Well, you might get a free anal probe.
If you've already got one of those years ago.
He's never going to live that down. That's going to be like, when he dies, that's going to be like every obituary that's written, like New York Times, whatever. They're going to mention that. Like, everything's about the anal probes. I feel sorry for him. He should have never said that. No, but like the whole thing with so getting back to this whole idea of like, where did this technology come from? I mean, when we talk about the ultra terrestrials, right? I used to call them, I don't really call them that much anymore, but I used to call them the elusive companions. That we have like this other, I don't know if you call them a race or intelligence or presence, that's been with us all along. You know, it's been with us our entire existence. And you've seen them recorded, you know, and this is where like all the ancient alien stuff comes from. You know, we've been sharing our existence with something else. I don't know what it is. I mean, well, objectively, I don't know what it is. You know, like I said, I believe it's this ultra-terrestrial presence. And you notice that like people who really get seriously into ufology and stay in it, you know, Amy Michelle, Jacques Vallée, you know, John Keel, what was that guy who did Saucer Smear? I forget his name. But they all sort of come to this conclusion that, you know, it's something that like we interact with, but is not quite from our reality. It's something from outside of reality that we interact with, but it isn't necessarily even physical. But it interacts with us through us. It uses us as its medium. It uses us as its conduit. It uses us basically as its internet. You know, so.
Yeah, well said. Well, we're probably going to have to wrap it up. We've almost done 2 hours. It's been an incredible experience. Yeah. It just kind of time disappear. But for the audience, I'm going to show this. I'll have this on the show notes. But here is Chris's website over here, sacredsun.blogspot.com. He's got his Lucifer technologies. He rebooted it at the end of summer. So it's all here with all the links. Excellent read, updates, and it's very cool. And of course, the Secret Sun is just an amazing place. Also, check out Chris's Patreon, because that's another treasure trove. It'll cost you nothing, and you'll get a ton of excellent content, including Chris does like a monthly podcast, which is always very cool, very inspirational, a lot of fun. So check out Chris's Patreon. Anything else I'm missing, Chris? Oh, and a lot of Lucifer's technology does make it to his novel. He will live up in the sky. So if you want a novel version of Lucifer's technologies, go there.
Yes, He Will Live Up in the Sky, and also The Endless American Midnight, which I published last year. I'm actually, I want to do an updated version of that. And I also want to do, I mean, everybody goes, well, what's going on with the sequel? It's like, I'm working on it. But don't forget, it took me, 5+ years to do the first book.
Yeah.
I'm only one person. I can only do so much. I mean, I have the whole story plotted out. I do. And I have most importantly, I have the ending plotted out. And, but getting from plot stage, your outline and your notes and sort of like your initial dialogue to an actual book. I mean, I'm preaching to the choir here. It's
yeah.
it's a whole different reality. But one of the things that is taking time with the sequel is that I don't want it to just be like Stranger Things 2, which is just, I don't want to rewrite the same story. But there are also a lot of themes that I want to incorporate. I want it, like He Will Live Up in the Sky has certain themes baked into it. It's about stuff. It isn't just like a incredibly entertaining and exciting thriller page turner. It's about things. It's about stuff, and I want to make sure that I do the same with a sequel, but not repeat myself. It's very, very tempting to just write the same book over, and that's a temptation that I want to resist. But I'm a big stay in your lane kind of guy.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to I'm not going to write I don't know, like a John Grisham novel or something. I'm gonna write, you're gonna know who wrote it, but there you go.
Yeah. Well, there it is. Well, awesome. Well, again, check out Chris's work, and there's so much more. And we don't even want to talk about the siren, because that right there is just, I keep saying every week, like, God, Chris, give me a break 1 week, because I think my heart's gonna stop if one more blog post, I'm gonna fall down dead in the Chris's real secret blog.
Well, so, my motto is, I'll stop when it stops.
Yeah, which is well, I guess he'll be writing from now until
I'm just following the bouncing ball.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm just.
You're just a conduit. Yeah.
I'm just being led around by my nose. I don't even know what to say anymore. It's just. It is literally the strangest phenomenon, not only that I've ever documented, but I've ever experienced. And it might be the strangest phenomenon that I could have ever conceived of. It's just endlessly bizarre. But this is part of, it's part of our new reality, the symbolism is very potent. You talk about the siren. I mean, I did another show last week. I think it's gonna go up next week. But we're talking about Lovecraft and Alice Bailey and stuff, and we're talking about the old ones and everything. And it's just like, well, when you talk about Lovecraftian old ones, what better example of that is the siren, right? And you cannot go anywhere in the United States, any small town or city or airport or shopping mall, without eventually running across the siren at least once. She's everywhere. She's everywhere you look. I mean, it's really to the point now that I think there are more. You're going to see more of that siren icon than you are like the golden arches anymore.
Well, you already have it with Starbucks.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm talking about.
I think it's a Gorgon, but yeah.
It seems to me that it's just like, well, what's the difference, right? It's just all the same kind of deal. But it just seems to me that there are probably more Starbucks, and not only Starbucks, but go to any convenience store, supermarket. You go to the beverage aisle, and you're going to see millions of them. Because Starbucks puts out all their iced coffees and all that kind of stuff. So it's just everywhere. And that's, you know what that is? That's sorcery.
Mm-hmm.
That's sorcery. You know, I mean, people go, well, what's sorcery? It's just like, well, when you implant this incredibly potent and powerful icon in the minds of billions of people around the world, that is sorcery, because it's not just like the Golden Arches. It's not just like, I don't know, Coca-Cola. Okay. It's a very potent and, you know, laden symbol that has to do with beliefs that date back thousands of years and have resurfaced in the past century in Lovecraft and all this other kind of stuff. You know? So this is where we are, you know. And once you take the blinders, no, well, it's like once you take the blinders off, it's just like this kind of stuff doesn't seem. I mean, it's kind of mind blowing still, but it's not essentially unexpected or remarkable. It's just this is where we are, and this is how the world works now. You know, we've had sorcerers working on us for at least 150 years, and now reality is starting to bend and change because of it. I mean, look at time. Have you ever? I don't know if it's been this way. My wife talks about this all the time. It's like, have you ever experienced a year that's gone by quicker than this year? I mean, 2020 seemed to last forever. It's like this year, just like, you know, and I talk about it's always Thursday. It's literally almost fucking Thursday. You know what I mean? Because it's just this year. I mean, it's almost over.
Yeah.
And you know, I'm still like, when did it even begin? I mean, time has just become malleable. The way we experience time has become malleable. And you know, you get older and that happens, right? But I've even had my kids say, "What the hell's going on?" You know? I think
The
it's a
young
collective
people
thing.
feel it.
What's that?
Yeah, if the young people are feeling it, then something's up.
Yeah, I think that the flow of time is changing. But I think that's with all reality. So I think that technology, as we understand it, starts to look pretty small in comparison to the majesty of nature. And nature not just being the natural world as we experience it, but time and space, you know, and all these other kinds of things that are as part of nature as, you know, trees and rocks are. You know?
Well said. Well, thank you for the audience down in the chat room, seeing everybody tonight. Great questions, great comments. Really appreciate your support. Please support Chris. Please support AM Byte. Appreciate the donations and everything else. And we will be back in the holidays, as this year, closes very fast. So, Vance, thanks for keeping us company and taking care of business down there.
Yeah, it was fun. Yep. I'm sorry to everybody that I didn't get to ask questions for. But go find Chris in his other places on this awful internet. You can try and ask him there.
Yeah. Chris is always good at answering questions on Facebook and so forth. And Chris, as always, thanks for coming on, and I really appreciate it. And love Lucifer's technologies, and I'm glad it's around.
What happened?
What happened?
Miguel stopped talking.
No, did I?
Yeah, you stopped talking.
I think I hit the mute button by accident or something. I saw everybody freeze. Well, let me do this again more formally. Chris, thanks for coming on AM Byte, and we look forward to the next round, the next party.
Yes, thanks. Fun. Scary,
right, everybody.
Yeah,
exactly. All right, everybody. As I say, thanks for being here. Thanks for being yourself, your true self, here in the desert of the real. Hello and goodbye. And keep writing your own gospel and living your own myth. Good night, everyone.
Good night.